ओके विजय जी, हम लाइव हैं। अब आप स्टार्ट कर सकते हैं।
Can I start?
या आप
Yes.
स्टार्ट कर सकते हैं।
Yeah. I'm Vijaya from Telangana, part of Shakti Abhiyan team. Welcomes you all and today's speaker Deepa Sinhaji on today Shakti Chintan Talk. Let me introduce you first about Shakti Abhiyan. This is a lead by Indian Youth Congress, Shakti Abhiyan. Shakti Abhiyan is a movement by women for women to educate, organize, and agitate for equal rights and ownership, hak and hissedari, inspired by the principle of Adi Abadi Pura Hak. At Shakti Abhiyan, we aim to create a pipeline of grassroots women political leaders by building women-centric politics around the idea of hak and hissedari. Women-centric politics is a pathway for the equal rights and ownership. This creates an opportunity for equal space for the women. For the women, those who are interested to join the politics and by through the representation of women at the local governance in the sense of parliament, assembly, and local body elections. And this is the objective of the Shakti Abhiyan. And in this view of this Shakti Chintan talk, we introduce our Deepa Sinhaji ma'am. Is it audible?
Yes, yes.
Yeah. Now let's understand in depth about this today's topic about the continuum of women's work by Deepa Sinhaji. The continuum of women's work in India reflects a long history of women's contributions across various spheres of society, from domestic labor to paid employment in the formal and informal sectors. Let us understand in depth about this today's speaker. Before we start her talk, let us know about her in short. Deepa Sinhaji is a development economist and independent researcher. Her areas of research include social policy, food and nutrition, public health and gender. She has worked as economics faculty at the Dr. B.R. Ambedkar University, Delhi. She has earlier worked with the Office of Commissioners to the Supreme Court on the right to food. She is also associated with the Right to Food campaign. Deepa ji contributes regularly to academic as well as popular publications. So can we, Deepa Sinha ji, can we uh, can we start from your understanding of the continuum of women's work in India?
Yeah. Thank you. Thank you, Vijaya. So I chose this topic because, of course, that all of you are Indira Fellows, young women who are entering the labor force or in the labor force. And also when you're thinking about women's empowerment, working towards women's development in the country, then employment is a very important tool through which women's empowerment can actually be achieved. I mean, something that we always say that women should, I mean, you hear it in the movies, you might have heard it from your parents, that you should have your own financial independence to be able to stand on your own feet, to be able to take your own decisions, even within the household. And employment is the main source through which this whole standing on own feet happens to most people, because that is where we earn our incomes from. Employment, of course, is important in many, many ways, but what I want to do is to try and understand what is the situation of women's employment in India. Again, if you people have been following the news and so on, it has been a very um, central issue to government policy. To also, for instance, you might be familiar again because you are in this Indira Fellow program, that in the global rankings on status of women, on gender gaps and gender status, India ranks quite low. And one of the main reasons we rank low is because of the poor women's employment participation in our country. So this issue of women not being enough in the labor force is an old issue in India. At the same time, when we think about it, at some level, it does not make sense, because if you actually look around you, most of the women you see would be doing some kind of work or the other. But so we also try and make a distinction between being gainfully employed and working. All women, of course, work. That has been the age-old slogan of the feminist movement in India as well, that all women are workers. But there are different kinds of work that women do. And not all work leads to access to other resources and empowerment, like paid employment does. So just to start with some basics, um, uh, I'll explain the figures. Don't I mean, there's nothing complicated here. Basically, what this is looking at is what is called a workforce participation rate. So basically, the workforce participation rate tells us the number of workers per 100 population in different categories. So we are looking at 4 different categories: the rural male, rural female, urban male, and urban female. And broadly, one thing that comes across very obviously here is that the male workforce participation rates, which includes urban and rural men, which are these top 2 lines, has been significantly higher than the female workforce participation rates across rural and urban areas and across different time periods. Here I'm looking from the 1980s. But what is interesting and what has been a topic of a lot of study and government policy is what I've circled here, which is this red line, which tells us what is the rural female workforce participation rate, which showed the sharp decline between the mid 90s, actually mid 2004s onwards, till very recently, till just before demonetization COVID. And why? So a lot of the research and the understanding has been on why did this decline happen, and how do we increase women's workforce participation rate? Like I said, it's a little puzzling. It's puzzling because we know that this is also the period when women's education increased, when the age at marriage got postponed, when one would believe that more women, we saw more women in newer sectors, like you see women pilots, you see women drivers, you see women in management, areas where usually women were not being seen in employment. One began to see women, but at the same time, this is a period when overall workforce participation rate actually declined. So what we should also try and understand is, why did this decline happen? And consequently, why is this recent increase happening? From 2019 onwards, like I said, you're seeing that it's again increasing. And if you follow documents like the Economic Survey or statements by the Minister for Labor, uh, the present government is also claiming this as a huge success, that earlier it was declining, but now it is increasing. So we need to understand what is this decline and what is this increase. So firstly, before we get into that, what we also need to understand is when these figures are given, and I am giving a little bit of a technical background because this is where a lot of the debate is currently in the country. Because like I said, the current government is also claiming that the problem of women's employment is being solved to a large extent with this employment increasing. So we need to understand what do we mean by employment. Now, across the world, and based on now ILO norms as well, there are 2 different terms that are used: work and employment. And there's a distinction that has been made between work and employment, where work involves anything that provides goods or services for others or for self-consumption, even when it is not marketed. So when women cook within their own household, that is work. Women taking care of children is work. Women taking care of their livestock is work. Women doing post-harvest work, women making achar, even if it is, or papad, which is not for the market, all that is work. But what is employment? Employment is that part of work which is remunerated. That is, you get some returns for it. It could be either through wages or salaries or through earnings from self-employment. Now, in India, there is a little bit of a confusion in how we measure employment, in the sense that the employment in India also includes a category which is called unpaid helpers in family enterprises. So it does not include unpaid care activities in the sense that it does not include cooking, cleaning, taking care of children, but it does include, say, a woman going into her own, her family owns a piece of land and she goes there during for weeding or during harvest time and helps out, but she doesn't get any money in her hand. Or say that they are running a shop from the household, and for a few hours of the day the woman sits there, but the shop is not in her house and she doesn't really get control over the investment in the shop or the money that they make from it. Similarly, that she doesn't own the land but she does some work there, or she takes the she feeds the, I mean, she does livestock work, so she cuts the grass, she feeds the buffalo or the goat. All this is also counted, and often they are put in the unpaid helper in family enterprises. So this is an important thing to understand, linking it to where I began from. When we understand employment as being empowering, employment is empowering when it does a certain things. And few things which are again very obvious and intuitively as a group of women we can understand. The first thing, like I said, when it is giving us money, control over resources, when it's putting money into our hands, that's when it is empowering. Another way in which employment also is empowering is that when it helps you go out of the house, meet other people, become part of collectives, and gives you an identity which is beyond the identity of being a daughter, sister, mother, and so on, where you're independently using your skill, doing something, contributing to a larger purpose. That is also something that contributes to improving women's status. When women go out, you're also getting new information. You're also learning things about your own health, your children's health. You understand how to access other government resources. So all of these come through when employment is of this nature. But not all work is that, and a lot of the work can actually be drudgery and a big burden and relating to leading to what we call time poverty, because women are doing work which is remunerative, which would be employment, but also a lot of work for which they're not getting any recognition or remuneration. And in that work, there are two kinds of work. There is economic activity, things which are directly contributing to what we call the system, to the national income. And there are other activities which we broadly call care work, which is not directly contributing to the national income in the way we measure it, but without it, the economy cannot function, civilizations cannot continue. So that would include having children, taking care of them, cooking, cleaning, uh, packing the tiffin box for children for their lunch, taking lunch for the men working in the fields. All of this is work which is either called social reproduction, called care work, which without which there cannot be an economy and the economy cannot function. But this work is not usually recognized. So there are two kinds of issues that come up when we talk about women's work and employment. One is the non-recognition of a lot of work that women do, which is often unpaid. So feminists have for long been arguing that all work of women should be recognized and should be valued. Because when it's not recognized, women, this usually, like if you ever do a survey and you go and if the respondent is a male, and oftentimes even when the respondent is a female, and you ask what does the woman do, the immediate response will be nothing. वो कुछ नहीं करती है, घर पे रहती है, घर को देखती है. But that this is work and that she is making a contribution to the economy even when she is in that category of kuch nahi karti hai, is something that one has been demanding, and that this should be valued, because only when it is valued, only when you understand, do you make the appropriate arrangements to reduce that burden, to share it within the household, and also that has an influence on the kind of wages and the kind of work that women get in the market. So what are the kinds of work that women are able to, employment that women are able to join, depends also on the burden of the unpaid domestic and unpaid caregiving work that they have within the households. So this distinction is important. So we do seek recognition for the work that women do, for all the work that women do. At the same time, we also recognize that remunerative, paid employment is what we are seeking when we say that women's workforce should increase. And the problem in India is that what we are seeing an increase in is in the unpaid part of it, but it is counted as employment. So if we look at, for instance, like I told you, there is this unpaid helpers category, which the Periodic Labor Force Survey and the NSS include in women's workforce. And that is a huge proportion. So if you look for women, you can see 22-23 is the latest data I'm using, but it would remain the same if you extend it to 23-24 also. If you look at for women, which is the middle set of bars, which is giving the trend, you see that from 2011 onwards, or even 2017-18, the period when women's workforce participation increased, that is a period when this share of unpaid helpers also increased. So yes, WPR of women has gone up, but where have women come in? Women are being counted, more women, as unpaid helpers. So it is not really paid employment of women that has gone up. And if we remove these unpaid helpers and all the unpaid work that women are doing, then the true employment rate is still quite low. It would still be only about 13%, whereas overall it's about 36% of women working. But actually, if you look at true paid employment rates for women, it is still quite low. And we are looking at all age groups here. If we remove children, then it would increase a little bit. But basically, the point being that the recent increase in women's employment that we see is actually not a success. Rather, what it is reflecting is this high share of unpaid helpers in self-employment. And if you can include also own account self-employment workers within the total employment. And why is that happening? There is also some understanding that that is happening because of distress. That when there is distress, when there is a lack of incomes, men are moving away and migrating, men are trying to earn incomes from sources, then women's work becomes more visible. So her going to the farm, her looking after the livestock is getting counted more now. But is it really bringing in more income in her hands can be totally questioned. What the data says, what you do see is a reverse kind of migration. You see more women going back into agriculture, and this is because it is a time when incomes are not increasing, and so you do whatever that is possible to find work. So what are the characteristics of women in employment? Like I said, you see that a lot of women are in this category of what we call self-employment. In self-employment, there are two types. Those who are own account workers, that is that they own the enterprise. And the other is, like I've just discussed, the unpaid helpers. So for women, just focus on this bar for a minute. In rural areas, you can see that if you add own account workers and unpaid helpers, the bottom two colors, then almost 60% of women are in these categories. And it is only a very small proportion who are in regular or wage salaried employment, which is 11% in rural areas and 55% in urban areas. And then the remaining are in the casual works. Now here also I would like to point out, and this is what I mean as when we use the term continuum, that it is when you look at women's employment, it's not as if all women are in salaried work, and it's not as if all work is paid for. So there is a continuum. Women do unpaid work, women do underpaid work, women do paid work, and often the same woman is doing a little bit of all of this. In this, like I said, in urban, it seems as if regular is very high. Here again, it's a definitional thing that we have to understand, that regular in the labor force surveys does not mean that you're in a regular job like we normally understand it. It means that you're being paid a regular salary. So even domestic workers, women who work in many of our homes to help us out with our cooking and our cleaning and our childcare, when we pay them a monthly salary, they get counted as regular workers. And a big share of the regular workers amongst women in urban areas are domestic workers. The one way in which you can see that is that even those women who are in regular employment, this is looking at, again, the first set is rural and the second set is urban. Broadly, the point is we are looking at, are they really formal employment? So amongst regularly employed women in urban areas, for example, 70% have no written job contract. 50%, half of them are not eligible for any paid leave, and half of them are not getting any social security benefit. Once again, remember, this is only those who are in regular employment in the brown color. The rest anyway don't have contracts or paid leave or social security benefits. These are the ones who are in regular, where you would expect that these things would be there. You see that even here, a large proportion of women do not have access to any social protection, paid leave, or written contracts. So it is highly informal nature of employment that women are concentrated in. Now, this is also reflected in what we call as wage gaps. That is, what are the women's wages as a percentage of men's wages? And you see, this is just giving you the overall share of women's wages to men's wages. So, for example, in rural areas, if a man is earning 100 rupees, then a woman gets average wage will be 65 rupees. In urban areas, if the man's wage is 100 rupees, the woman's wage is 77 rupees. So everywhere you see, that's among regular workers as well as in casual work, you see that the wages that women are paid. And there's a lot of studies again here, and this is across the world, you observe it. And it's quite stark in India as well, that even in the same kinds of work, you see that women's wages are lower than men's wages. And the other end of the spectrum is what we call the glass ceiling. You also see that women tend to be concentrated in lower levels of occupation. And as you go higher up, so for example, if you look at universities, as you go from students to professors, there'll be fewer women. Within professors, as you go from assistant professors to associate to professor, there'll be fewer and fewer women. As you go even further higher to deans and vice chancellors, the proportion of women keeps reducing. This you see in, say, even a corporate company also, that as you go higher, there seems to be a glass ceiling and you have fewer women who you see. So that's the other issue. And here again, we have to understand that this is happening not because women are less skilled or less able, but it's basically happening broadly. One can understand it as happening because of two factors. One is that there's a general gender bias, and there is a belief that there are these gender norms and gender segregation of work where you feel that women are less productive and less able to work, because of which that bias results in lower wages. But there is also the flip side of it, which is that because women have this high burden of domestic work, they also seek out more flexible jobs, jobs which are usually therefore also end up being low paying. And there are a lot of biases related to women which are related to their domestic duties. So you find employers, for instance, saying that they'll take a lot of leave because they'll take leave when somebody in their family falls sick, the child falls sick, or when they get pregnant, when they have children, and so on. But these are all gendered roles that women are playing, for which they take leave. But then that becomes a bias towards employing women or paying them well. So this whole burden of the homework, the household work, is something that needs to be seen both in the context of recognition that I talked about, that we have to recognize that that is work and a lot of time of women go into it, but also in terms of that all women do it, whether they are in the labor force or not, which is what I'm trying to show you using the time use survey in this figure. So for example, you see women in the labor force, which is this, 93% of women who are in the labor force, they participate in domestic chores, compared to 20 less than, domestic chores, and about 25% women participate in caregiving services. This is a little lower because not all households would have children at any given point of time. But if you look at men, only 30% of men participate in domestic chores when they are in the labor force. When they're not in the labor force also, a lot of women participate in domestic chores and only 21% of men participate in domestic work or caregiving activities. So we see this big gap between women doing homework, domestic work, and childcare compared to men doing it. And that gap remains whether women are in employment or not. And this is what we call the double or triple burden of work, which is that even when women are in employment, they have the double burden of the household work. That does not go away. And we see that the sharing also doesn't improve very much. Even when women are employed and men are employed, you see that it is women who do this household work and caregiving services, and that is there in all households almost. And it's not just that they do it. So if we start recognizing that work, if we count that work, the time that women spend on that work, which is what this has done, this is adding up all the work that women do, whether it's in women and men, whether it's in employment, whether it is in producing goods for their own use, or domestic work or childcare work. If we add it all up, which is the second and fourth for women, the first and third for men, whether they are in the labor force or not, women on the whole spend more time working than men do. See, this is taller than this. This is also taller than this. If you look at only the bottom two, which is employment and production for own goods, then it seems as if men are working for longer hours than women do. But on the whole, if you recognize all work, then women are working for longer hours than men do. And what is the flip side of this? This means women are getting less time for rest and leisure than men are getting. And usually these top two colors, the blue and green, are not counted as work. And so that's why we hear things like khali beti rehti hai, ghar pe baithi hai. But actually that is also work. And as women, I think we would be able to relate to it, that this is also a lot of drudgery. Cooking every day, cleaning every day, washing clothes every day, taking care of children is as much work, and it is not equivalent to watching TV or going out with your friends or playing a game and so on. That there is a difference between these two. The former is work, the latter is leisure, and that differentiation needs to be made. And we see that in India, the gender division of labor is such that the entire burden of the unpaid work falls heavily on women, as a result of which you see this continuum where even when women are in the employment, in the labor force, they are concentrated in self-employment. Like I showed you the figures, most women are in self-employment, even within self-employment as unpaid helpers in family enterprises. They're mostly informal. The gender gaps remain. And like I just showed, the time use data brings out a burden of unpaid work as well. So what are the factors if we are thinking of policy, and if we are thinking of some factors I've already talked about while talking about the trends that determine women's employment? Again, thinking about it at a macro level, but each of the factors you can think about it at a micro level for each of you as well. So broadly in economics, you divide this into supply factors and demand factors. Supply factors are labor supply factors, like what are the factors which makes women join the labor force, right? In that, some things that kind of explain is, say if there is more participation in education, then the overall labor force participation of women could go down a little bit, because now there are more women in, say, college or university, and they're not being seen in employment because they're joining later. But over a longer period of time, as more and more women get educated, you will see that more and more of them are in the labor market. But there is also the other kind of pull factor, which is that it's being seen that as incomes increase and there is some amount of upward mobility, there is a greater pressure. Often it's women are doing it seemingly out of choice as well, which is that they want to concentrate more on homemaking, spend more time with children, and now you can afford to do it. And therefore more women decide not to join the labor force. That could also be a factor. Linked to this is upward mobility in income, that you often see that amongst the poorest sections, women's labor force participation is the highest, because they cannot do without both people working there. But as the incomes increase, then the woman withdraws from the labor force because they're able to make do with just the man's income. And often what you see is what is called a U shape, that is amongst the poorest, the women's employment is very high. As incomes increase, women withdraw. And then as they get richer and richer, they go back into the labor force. Another reason related is the unpaid work burdens. If there is a sick, old, elderly person in the household, if there is a young child who needs to be taken care of all the time, then these also become reasons why women decide not to join the labor force. Women or women's family decide for them. That whole thing we could put in the box of culture, which is that there are cultural norms related to whether women can work or not. Different geographies have different norms related to this. Different castes have different norms related to this. And usually the whole culture argument is not so black and white that women are allowed to be employed or not, but it meshes with all these other factors. And it really depends on what the nature of the employment, the timing, the pay, and all of that. But culture is also an issue. It is an issue that there is patriarchy. There is a belief that the woman's place is within the house. And that is something that women have to struggle against as well, although it's changing. But on the other hand, so often when we talk about women's employment, only these factors are looked at as if it is entirely within the household and the responsibility of the woman that she goes and finds a job. But what is equally important and what explains the trends in the recent period is also the demand factors. Demand meaning demand for labor, like are jobs available? And here you see what I've called declining employment elasticity of output, that as growth is taking place, actually the number of jobs being created is becoming less and less. So what is being called jobless growth, which is because the growth is now basically happening in a capital intensive manner, huge machines. So for instance, government spending a lot of money in building highways, but the number of employees who would get work on building highways has been reducing because a lot of the work is now being done by machines. Even within agriculture, there is a low absorption of labor in agriculture, which is why in rural areas you see that data point of declining women's labor force participation, because the work that women were doing in agriculture has now largely been replaced by machines or by other kinds of technology. For instance, you have harvesters, you have so a lot of the harvest work used to be done by women. You have weedicides. Weeding was a work that women used to do. But driving the harvester is done by men. Spraying the weedicide is done by men often. So when women are being pushed out of agriculture because their jobs are being taken over by technology, there are not enough jobs in non-agriculture for women to be absorbed into. There is also the problem that the few jobs that are getting created are very high skilled jobs, and because of various patriarchy related issues which we have already discussed, there are gaps in education achievements. So amongst engineers and so on, you will see, obviously you see a gap, there are fewer women there. So again, that the characteristics of, therefore, women, where do they work then? So it's a combination of this. What job is available? What job am I able to do? For what job am I able to do? I'm looking at how educated am I? How safe is the environment? What is my household work? How much time can I give for outside employment? All of these are considerations which apply to women much more than men. Are those jobs available? So when in the context of India, often people blame culture. People say in India, women are not allowed to go out and that's why they're not working. But we are saying, look at the data. Women work when they are able to find work which they can do along with their domestic work, which is safe and which is respectable. So you see that a lot of work is self-employment. A lot of work, even amongst those women we call as employees, a lot of workers, the location of work is at the home. So you'll see women doing home-based work. It could be embroidery. It could even be doing various manufacturing industries parts work, like bending a safety pin. You have these women who you do this the small part for a car, automobile manufacturing, small parts, the work happens within the home. where skill requirements are also lower. And you also find that in government jobs, like in Asha, Anganwadi, these are all women only, but primary school teachers and so on, there are more women because even families feel that that is safer jobs, more secure jobs, and they're more willing to send women all of in those places. So these are the kind of jobs that women look for, but these are also the kind of jobs that are willing to take women because that is where they like the flexibility. It's low paying. Men would not work for that kind of work. But what is interesting is that all surveys, when you ask women, do you want to work? Right? Like I showed you, very few women are, the labor force participation rates are low. But when you ask women, do you want to be working? Most women say yes. But most women also say we want to work if there is suitable employment. Now, we have to try and understand what is this suitable employment. And I am trying to argue that the suitable employment is something which allows women to manage this continuum where the unpaid work burdens remain high. So when we look at government programs, we have to look at government programs in this context. Are they meeting these requirements of women? Only then would they increase the women's workforce participation rate. So what are the government programs that currently exist? You have the National Rural Livelihood Mission program, under which primarily self-help groups of women are made. They do some saving, microfinance activities, set up enterprises and so on. You might have heard of the term Lakhpati Didi, which is one big flagship program of the present government, is that through these NRLM groups, they intend to make women into Lakhpati Didis. Now, again, we have to understand here, this is once again self-employment, and there are many issues with self-employment. It's not easy for it to be profitable. But one thing I do want to point out that when they say Lakhpati Didi, we have to understand that even that ambition is so low, because what does Lakhpati mean? Lakhpati means 1 lakh rupees per annum. They're actually talking about household. But even if we think about it per woman, then we are aiming to put women in some kind of livelihood activity where they earn even less than 10,000 rupees a month, right? So in today's prices, that's not very much. That's actually poverty level of income. But it's been made into a huge slogan as if it is really improving women's lives. Similarly, you have these Mudra loans for small marginal enterprises where women are given a preference. Then you have the Narega for wage employment, where you see that more than 50% of the workers are women. And if you have any of you have any exposure to rural areas, you will know that any Narega worksite that you go to, you see a lot of women and a lot of old people as well. This is also again one big factor, two big factors I would say in Narega, which attracts women. One is that the worksite is close to the house. That's within the act itself, that the work has to be provided within 5 kilometers radius, and therefore that allows women to go. The work timings are also such, usually it starts very early in the morning and ends by afternoon. So they are able to manage it with the household work. And the second big factor also is that the employer here is the state, it's the government. So even where there, because of caste norms and other kind of patriarchal norms, where women are not allowed to work in, say, wage work, when it is Narega work, you see that women are allowed to participate. Another area which is very important, like I mentioned, when it comes to women's employment is public services. A lot of our public services depends on women's labor. Anganwadi workers and helpers combined is almost 30 lakh women. Asha workers is 10 lakh women. Midday meal workers and helpers are about 25 lakh women. If you count all kinds of other services, there are about 1 crore women in the front lines who are working with the community. And as fellows and as people who are mobilizing women, this is a very important group to tap into. Because they have education, they're providing some very important service to the community, and there are many issues of their own. While they are getting this employment, it does not really qualify to be government jobs because they are considered volunteers, they're paid very little amount, and they are quite overworked. All these are direct, of course, direct employment creating or livelihood creating initiatives. Then you also have support for reducing the unpaid work burdens. So again, I'm repeating myself again, the same point that one reason women are not able to participate fully in employment is because of their unpaid work burdens. So how do you reduce the unpaid work burdens? If there are good social services, that is, if there's a child care center, if there is some care for elderly care, not just in terms of child care and elderly care, if you have a pressure cooker, if you have a water tap which is bringing water to the house, if you have a gas cylinder which is the only or piped gas, so you don't have to collect firewood or you don't have to prepare dung cakes, all this is unpaid domestic and care work that women do, because of which they cannot get into a full-time job. If there is support for reducing these unpaid work burdens, then you see that women can be participating in the labor force more. We have a little bit of all of this, but not enough. So where do you, and with this I'll end. So where should the policy attention be? What should we be demanding as women for employment to be created for women? First, related to what I was just saying, a lot of enabling services are required for women to be able to participate in employment. So say there are women, young women in a village, they have maybe even done graduation, did some education, and there is, say 20 kilometers away, there is a factory and jobs are available there. That is not enough. These women to go there, unlike men who might be given a bike and sent off, there is no concern of safety and so on. For women to go there, you need a lot of enabling services. You need transport services. So that's why these free bus schemes are excellent schemes, which are currently there only in a few states and in urban areas, but that really encourages women to join the workforce. Public safety is a huge issue, and there's a lot of research to show this, that if the safety, not just in the workplace, but on the way to the workplace, if that is not there, then women withdraw from the labor force. Hostels is another huge thing for which there should be a movement in the country, because particularly when women come into urban areas, housing is a very big issue. Safe housing, affordable housing for working women. If you look at the budgets and the schemes for hostels, it's very, very meager. And then availability of care services that I've already discussed. All of this in the ILO framework is also called the 5R framework, which is reduce, that is reducing the burden of unpaid work. How do you do that? By having water, gas, pressure cookers, electricity, and so on. Redistribute, which is within the household also, the gender norms need to change. There needs to be more sharing amongst different, because there will be some unpaid household work that always remains, which needs to be done. But the gender segregation of that work is something that we need to overcome, and that needs to be redistributed. Recognize, I've talked a lot about recognizing this work as work. And two more, particularly for women who are in care work, like the Ashas and the Anganwadis and the domestic workers in our households, is to reward, give them the right kind of pay, and represent, which is give them voice and their union's voice in decisions about them. In doing all this, encouraging public employment, not to say that all women can be employed in the government, but that plays a huge role in improving women's employment opportunities. And all countries where there are more women in public employment, you see more women then come in private employment as well. But in public employment, the issue of job quality and pay remains very important. The fourth is improving data systems. Like I've been saying right from the beginning, how do we overcome this thing of क्या करती है महिला कुछ नहीं करती है, to actually capturing what is it that women are doing, while keeping in mind that not all work is not employment. So time use surveys, for instance, is something that is very useful in this. India has only one national level time use survey in 2019, but we have to understand the breakup and the disaggregation of the data, because the current government is using the data system to show increase in women's employment, where actually what you see is an increase only in unpaid employment and a distress related employment. That point is being missed. And of course, the bigger question, which we are not discussing very much in detail, is what kind of economy do you need that the overall job creation also increases. That is a big crisis in our country, that there are no jobs. And in a context where there are no jobs and when there is patriarchy, the few jobs that are created, men will always have first claim on that. I'm not saying that's all right. That's not how it should be. So you need all of these other things so that women have equal access to available employment. But also a bigger issue is improving employment opportunities overall, where there are certain gaps as well. I'll stop here. Thank you. I'm happy to take questions.
Thank you so much, Deepaji. Your session was very insightful. We learned so many things. How about the work participation of women in this continuum of this work India? I would like to ask questions. Is there any questions from our participants?
In chat, there is a one question, Vijay, you can read.
Yes, ma'am. Real income determinant is equal to wages minus inflation rate. The inflation rate marks the purchasing power. Will a man or woman curtail her expenditure to be in tandem with the government policy, either as a labor force or self-employed? Is it a blame game?
I don't know if I fully understand the question, but I'll give an answer broadly
Yeah,
related to this. It is true. Real income means that wage and inflation. I don't know if people are familiar. So if you're earning 100 rupees, let's just say that there is only chapatis that you can buy with your 100 rupees. That's the only thing you want to buy. Say for your 100 rupees, you were getting 10 chapatis. You're still earning 100 rupees, but now you're getting 6 chapatis for your 100 rupees. So your income has not gone down, but your real income has gone down. In India, when we look at the data, we do see that real income is something that is going down. But towards the second point of what Shanta is saying, also on this whole issue of self-employment, what we need to understand, why do we not see, if you notice in my entire presentation, I did not give figures of unemployment. And there is a reason for that. Because the definition of unemployment is that you are actively seeking for work and you're not getting a job. So if you look at unemployment rate in India, it's only 5%. But as young people, does that make sense to you that unemployment is so low? As a teacher, it doesn't make sense to me. I know how difficult it is for my students to go out and find a job. But why is it so low then? It's low because it's called, because in countries like India, where the income levels are so low, you see that people will do any work. Wages are low, there are no incomes, there is no assets. So people will do whatever work that is, even if it is foraging, going to the forest and collecting some items, trying to do more agriculture in the small part of land that they have, setting up a pakoda stall like our Prime Minister suggested few years back. People will do whatever they can to get their livelihoods going. So they might not be in open unemployment, but they do not have a remunerative uh, employment. And I think there should be a right to employment, that people get a living wage. There is a second reason also unemployment shows low, which is called discouraged employment, which is that women in many contexts, you don't go looking for work if you know there is no work available. And this is particularly relevant to women. So a lot of women in rural areas, even in urban areas, when you know there are no jobs, then you say, okay, I'll stay at home, I'll take care of my children, I'll do this, because where do I apply? There is no work anyway. The market is too bad. So overall, government policy currently is such that whatever I showed in the last slide, that the support that you need for employment and direct employment, expenditure on that is falling. Income and real incomes are actually on the decline for the poor. And that does not entirely show up in the employment data. But that is the more important issue.
Another question from Jamal from Puducherry. Any research paper recommended to understand gender pay gap in urban and tech-based jobs?
I mean, there are a lot of papers. I can send Shraddha some link and she can share with all of you.
Okay.
So gender pay gap is a huge issue in not just in India, across the world. In fact, those of you who watch Netflix I'm forgetting. There's a nice documentary on Netflix on women's work, and not in India. It's global. I think you should watch it. That link also I'll give Shraddha. I mean, you even have Hillary Clinton speaking in it, and there this link comes out very clearly that these other kind of responsibilities that women have to take care of children, give birth to children, housework, and so on, how that results in the wage gap as well as the glass ceiling. And there, one thing for us to understand is that having children, taking care of children, taking care of the household is not only a personal work, that is contributing to the economy and nation building. That's the point. When we talk about recognition, that is what needs to be recognized. Yeah, Shraddha, I think so. Yeah, that's the one.
Okay, any other question? One question from my side. You have already highlighted the schemes which are running by the Modi government, and I would like to focus more on this question regarding the latest union budget. So basically, if you see the speech of the Nirmala Sitharaman, they were not talking about the unemployment and poverty, anything. Means there is no single word. And so I would like to ask, could you please highlight some points regarding the gender budget? Because they used to say every time they are giving too much to the gender budget, but actual
So,
figures.
yeah.
Yeah.
That's important. Actually, this time also they've talked about woman power a lot. Firstly, when you say gender budget, it is budget from various ministries, whatever. So, say Pradhan Mantri Awas Yojana, a huge proportion of that budget is shown as gender budget. And one reason you see the gender budget number increasing is they keep changing definitions. So, one year they did not show the free ration in gender budget. The next year they showed the free ration and gender budget, and you see that there is a huge increase in gender budget. But what are we interested in? We would be more interested in the direct spending on women related schemes. So if you look at the budget for the Women and Child Development Ministry, that has been declining in real terms over the last 10 years since this government came. In fact, the entire ministry's budget in real terms, again adjusting for inflation, it is actually coming down, and coming down quite drastically. And already spending on women was quite low. Similarly, this whole Lakpati Didi, National Rural Livelihood Mission, there is no money that the government is spending on women. What is the government saying? That we'll form groups, you save, you invest your money, you do business, and you earn money. But when the market is low, when the economic opportunities are not so great, again, women don't earn, they are not able to make any profitable enterprises out of that. Whereas the other area that I mentioned, again, where directly government affects women's employment, is all these workers that you have, Asha, Anganwadi. Now you have many new cadres, Drone Didi, Pashu Sakhi, Nyay Sakhi. All of these women, their work, they're not even recognized as workers. Their salaries have not gone up. So this time in the speech, the minister mentioned Saksham Anganwadi. But what Saksham Anganwadi will you have when the Anganwadi worker is paid so little? And the salary for the Anganwadi worker contributed by central government has not increased from 2018. So it's been 7 years and it's anyway very low. It's only 4,500 rupees that central government sets as the wage. And that also has not been increased. Whereas prices have gone up so much. So it is quite a sham. There are a lot of big words and new acronyms used each time. But if you actually look at the figures, budget allocations, you see that the allocations for women-oriented schemes are very low, have always been low, but additionally in the last 10 years, in real terms, they have been declining.
Thank you. Yes, team. Any other question? You can raise your hand or you can put in the chat box.
Yeah, hi, Deepaji. This is Shivlal.
Hi.
What are the ways we can reduce these gaps and make more equitable? Like what challenges the next generation should be facing? Or way forward India need to look into like that? Any suggestions or any inputs that you would like to add?
Yeah. So broadly, like I was saying, at two levels. One is creating jobs itself is a big challenge, and currently we see that there is a demand deficit in our country. Investment is not coming forth, and one of the reasons investment is not coming forth is that there's no purchasing power. So the government needs to spend in a manner in which incomes of those at the lower levels increase, so that demand increases and newer jobs are created. But additionally, there are certain things that really need to be done to expand women's employment. And in that, one big area is reducing women's care work burdens. And this, for instance, we have a Maternity Benefits Act, but that applies to only women in the organized sector. So more than 95% of women in the workforce do not come under the Maternity Benefits Act. Similarly, like I said, transport, I think there's not enough data, but some small studies which are showing like this free bus scheme has enabled more women to participate in the labor force. Hostels, housing is another big issue. And I think at some level, creches, some of these issues are being recognized by big corporates now. For instance, I think Flipkart has a 6-month maternity leave. Many of these corporates have now childcare centers within their campuses where people can bring their children and leave them there while they work. So, and there are flexible work arrangements allowing people to work from home. So these things are being recognized in the private sector, in the huge corporates which are able to afford them. But the government needs to regulate, provide services, because a lot of people are in the informal sector or in these small enterprises which cannot afford to provide these services. So we need to have many more childcare centers. We don't have any childcare. There is one scheme of Government of India which is called Palna, which has barely 500 creches across the country. There used to be the Rajiv Gandhi National Creche Scheme, which was also small, but that has been entirely shut down. So all these enabling things needs government investment. So maternity entitlements also currently only 5,000 rupees is given. That is not enough to make a woman not go to wage work and stay at home. So all these enabling services, I think, are very important when it comes to women's employment. Maternity and childcare services, services which reduce the domestic work burden, just having drinking water coming right up to your household, having a gas cylinder, not like Ujjwala where you've given the cylinder one time, but regular supply where people don't have to depend at all on firewood or on dung and so on. All this will reduce and free up women's time to be available for gainful employment, and that requires investment. So when the minister said investing in people, these are the kind of things that really need to be done.
Thank you for your.
Is there any questions from anyone?
So maybe we can conclude.
Yes, ma'am. Deepaji, really we are very welcome and we are giving thank you for you. You have given very insightful session. How we Indra Fellows joined Shakti Abhiyan, and we come to know that what is the work participation in this scenario, and we have gained this knowledge also. So what is the work participation and all? Really, we will utilize in the upcoming wherever when we go to the ground level, we will utilize this knowledge at the ground level. So thank you so much for your session.
Thank you. Thank you,
Is
Shraddha.
there
Thank you,
anything
Vijaya.
you want to add
Yeah,
it?
bye.